everyone awake? Okay, good. You got your coffee and your donuts, so that's good. I'm very happy to be here this morning to moderate the discussion we're about to have. So I'll start off by reading the first biography for our moderators here, our panelists, I mean. So first one we have Alexa Potashnik. Alexa is the founder and president of Black Space Winnipeg. Alexa Joy Potashnik has demonstrated a firm commitment to community development and social justice, influencing initiatives across Winnipeg that promotes diversity and inclusion for BIPOC communities. This year, Alexa was the lead organizer of the Afro Prairie Festival, Central Canada's first Black Film Festival, and founder of the annual Afrocentric Artist Showcase, Nuit Noire. While establishing safer spaces for Black folks and people of color, Alexa's work continues to challenge white privilege, dominance, and supremacy through grassroots activism and encourages demonstrations of Black radical advocacy. In 2017, Alexa was the MC for the Women's March on Washington, Winnipeg, an event that drew over 3,000 Winnipeggers to the heart of downtown Winnipeg, demonstrating solidarity for social justice, and was honored to introduce Dr. Angela Davis at her lecture, "Freedom is a Constant Struggle." Awarded as the Humanitarian of the Year at the African Community Awards, Frost Winnipeg 2018, and recipient of the Sybil Shack Youth Award from the Manitoba Association of Rights and Liberty in 2017, Alexa has been a speaker for We Day Canada, presented at TEDx University of Winnipeg, and now sits on the Community Advisory with the City of Winnipeg. She is also recognized as one of CBC's Future Under 40, and she continues to push against the status quo, ensuring that there are platforms for the BIPOC voices in society to be seen and heard. So the next person is Craig Brown. Craig was born and raised in Kingston, Jamaica, and moved to Canada more than a year ago with his wife, Kadeen. Craig has a Bachelor of Science in Psychology and Human Resource Management and an MBA from the University of the West Indies in Mona. After spending 11 years in the financial sector, he decided on a career change and is now pursuing a master's in kinesiology and recreation management at the University of Manitoba, under the supervision of Dr. Leisha Strachan. His aim is to transition to the applied sports psychology field. Craig has worked with various nonprofit organizations in Jamaica related to youth development, such as Christian Camping International Jamaica and Moorland Camps, and HIV/AIDS peer education, Methodist Youth in Mission Everywhere in conjunction with the Jamaica Red Cross. Craig has a heart for youth development and is also a massive sport enthusiast. This combination of passions has led to his research interest exploring the lived experiences of newcomer, immigrant, and migrant athletes as they encounter a new culture in the Canadian sport context. Craig aims to give voices to the experiences of newcomer athletes and to also make a difference in the lives of others by being the change that he wishes to see in others, one interaction at a time. So last one would be Maurice Alexander. Maurice Alexander is currently an analyst in the Treasury Board Secretariat in the Department of Finance with the Government of Manitoba. Before that, he was a transportation policy consultant with the Department of Infrastructure. He has a background in finance with the Royal Bank and extensive political experience, as both a candidate and a campaign manager. More recently, Maurice has been retained by the University of Winnipeg as an instructor to teach the public administration as well as the government business relations courses. Maurice has a Master of Arts in political economics from the University of Manitoba and a Bachelor of Arts in political studies from St. Boniface University. Wow, well, you guys are amazing. You did so much wonderful things, and I'm very excited to ask you now the tough questions for the debate. So, question number 1. What are you focusing in your work to improve Black lives? So we'll start with Maurice.
Slide, this is better. Sorry, I have problems speaking in microphones. I'm either too high or too low all the time. I think for myself over the last few years, I spent a lot of time in the Trinidad and Tobago Society and the Council of Caribbean Organizations of Manitoba doing various activities, but over the last couple of years since I started working at the U of W, my focus has been to do a bit of micro-targeting. I find that venues like this are always very great and very helpful, but I find that there's a lot of young, particularly Black men that don't know how to navigate themselves through the system and whatnot. So since I've become an instructor, I spend a lot of time just micro-targeting a lot of individuals and spending time with them outside of the classroom just to talk about life and some of the other things and helping them navigate university life, because I find that sometimes these venues are kind of overwhelming and it doesn't always allow for that type of dialogue after the fact and just understanding things about life and not so much what's been happening in the classroom. So I think for myself that's been kind of interesting to kind of navigate away from the larger community programs and start speaking to individuals and kind of helping them out that way.
First of all, thank you all for having me. It's great to see this lovely crowd. To answer your question, I think it's difficult to pinpoint an exact initiative that has contributed to the enhancement and betterment of the Black community in Winnipeg. But I will say with the work that I've done with Black Space Winnipeg and the folks that I work with, we've definitely taken a radical approach to what I think Winnipeg is a very conservative city and a conservative province that we have in Manitoba. In 2016, we had the Black Lives Matter vigil at the Manitoba Legislative Building, and that was the first time, I'm born and raised in Winnipeg, that was the first time that I saw people in the Black community across the diaspora really get together and, you know, express their solidarity and concern for the injustice that Black folks continue to face across the country and in North America as well. So with Black Space, what we've done is, like, when we first started, I guess the work that we were doing, it was a lot through artistic resistance. So Patricia mentioned Nuit Noir and the Afro Prairie Film Festival, and it was a lot of, to be really honest, educating white people on the realities that Black people were experiencing in Manitoba. Because for a long time, and even when I go to other parts of the country, people forget that Black folks exist in the prairies, and we're here, and we've been here for time. And so my family, my mom's side's from Jamaica. They did the whole Jamaica to England to Canada migration, and people forget. And I think even today, you saw pictures of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, which is amazing, but we have so many Black leaders, both in Manitoba and across the country. Even CBC put out 5 influential Black Manitobans to follow on their recent article, which mentions folks like Wade Williams, and people that I know personally in my network, like that should have been in there, like Jerry Atwell and Beatrice Watson. There's so much we can look to and support within our own community, and what Black Space has tried to do is to remind people that you don't have to go far to appreciate and respect the folks who have done so much work for us in our community. So I would say with Nuit Noir and the Afro Prairie Film Festival, and then most recently our community group therapy program for Black folks in Winnipeg who want to work towards better mental health practices and work through trauma. Project Heal, which is now facilitated at the Women's Health Clinic. That's a program that I think has transformed Black Space as an organization and really put the focus and concern on Black mental health, because I don't think there's enough resources in the city that target that. And again, we need to support and really cultivate our community and be there for one another. So that's just 3 things I think, I hope, that has contributed to the betterment of our community.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for having me. Well, similar to what Maurice mentioned, well, back home in particular, Jamaica, nice warm Jamaica. One of the main things that I focused on was just mentoring Black young men in particular, because I recognized that young men needed an avenue or an opportunity just to share, just to speak, just to be mentored, just someone to guide them along the path in particular. I haven't been here that long, but in the short time that I've been here, I think my research is focusing on immigrants in general and just giving them an opportunity to voice their experiences as they settle into life here in Canada. So that encompasses all races, all genders. But for the short time that I've been here, I've been focused also on getting involved in the Black community, sitting and getting to listen to the stories of others, those who have grown up here, those who moved here, just to get an idea of what it is like, what it has been like, and to see what role I can play in helping them to share their stories and in also being a part of the change that needs to happen in Winnipeg.
Wow, well, thank you everyone. I'll just add one thing to that question. So it seems like a lot of you guys are doing amazing work. So thank you for that. And like one of my work I'm focusing on is to have, I guess, more Black leaders, especially in politics or in other leadership positions. So I won't get into too much details. You can talk to me later about it. But I think it's also important to encourage one another and support one another. So that's one of the things you guys are doing. It's really amazing, and we'll definitely have to have a chat later. So, second question, how do you see your role as a leader different than the Black leaders of the 1960s? So I'll pick on Alexa.
Wow. How would I see it different? I think we have come a long way. We have. But I don't think we've come far enough, if that makes sense. There are people who have come before leaders of today to even, their work is the reason why we're all sitting on this panel, right? We didn't have spaces where we can speak openly about systemic racism, oppression, our experience as Black folks. And because folks in the past were trailblazers and pioneers of their time who would not accept the realities of that era, that's the reason why we're here. The difference, honestly, I still think we're fighting the same fight. I think it's just presented in a different way. I think we went from maybe more overt to covert, but I don't think the work I'm doing is too, it's different in a sense where, you know, we're asking and demanding accountability now, and resources and implementation and tangible things that we can have for our community, because we've been asking for the same things since the 1960s. And I don't think we've received it yet. I think we're asking for education, public health, safety, housing, even, actually Patricia and I were at a conference in Ottawa earlier this February, the National Black Canadian Summit, and I met the most incredible folks from across the country doing similar work to myself, doing amazing work from Vancouver to Nova Scotia, and we're still asking for the same things that our leaders before us were asking. And it's eye-opening, and I think systems are really good at giving us a crumb and, you know, expecting us to be happy about it. But I still think there's a long way to go, and until, it's also great to have, you know, leaders and the folks on the stage, but, you know, one person can't do it all by themselves. And that's something I realized in my work and through community activism. You could get burned out really quickly, and we have to move, I think, more to we, because I've run out of I's to use. I can't use I anymore. We have to use we as a community, and yeah, that's what I would say. I think it's just presented in a different way, but we're fighting the same struggle.
Yeah, following on from that, I agree to an extent. I'm still learning a lot about Canada's rich history, but I recognize that Canada has a very rich history as it relates to the involvement of blacks in the development of the country, from the Underground Railroad and even before that to now, and the role that blacks play in the betterment of others in the society. The main thing or theme that I would take from it, or in terms of my role going forward, it's just dialogue. So far, I've just been trying to, sometimes people just don't know. And it's not a case where some don't want to know, some just don't know. And I've recognized that. I think that's been my approach, just to foster dialogue. From my background back home, the best image that I can use to paint it is Bob Marley. No, I'm not just putting a shameless Jamaican plug inside. But when you have political tensions in Jamaica, it can get violent. One image that's been burned into my consciousness was, the leaders of our two political parties, the parties were at war, and it was tearing our country apart. And Bob Marley was having a concert, and at the concert, he invited both leaders to come on stage. It was Bustamante and Manley, and they were cousins. And it was so symbolic. He stopped his concert, he invited both of them on stage, and he spoke about the need for peace within our nation. And he held both of their hands together in an embrace. And it was just one of those moments that kind of galvanized our country. And I think going forward, if that's the role that I can play, that's been my approach. And I think I just want to foster dialogue so that we can link hands together and create spaces where we can have discussions, where we can air our concerns, where we can, you know, just talk. Because I'm recognizing the more that I speak to people, like, it's just not something that's talked about anymore. Mm-hmm. It's not as overt. It still exists, but it's kind of ignored, swept under the rug at times, or it's just a phantom to many. So that's my approach.
So just to follow up on some of their points, I guess for myself, how I view well, personally, I've always been uncomfortable being referred to as a leader. I find the term very kind of nebulous, and I don't know if I deserved or earned that. But I think one of the issues is that the narrative has changed. The way we conceptualize what it means to be a black person in society for us, and even myself, when I'm in the classroom, I always think of myself as a young person until I go into the classroom and I'm talking to somebody who's 18 who literally just came out of high school, and I'm like, oh, well, I'm twice your age now. So, you know, and so I think for us it's kind of recognizing that the world has changed, and while we acknowledge that we have made things better, I think there's a bit of apathy sometimes, because it's very easy to grab onto objects or houses or cars or clothes or things that were traditionally denied from poor or disadvantaged groups that they now have access to. So there's sometimes this perception that, that we're a little bit further along than we actually are. And I think sometimes we get hidden and we get blinded by some of those things. And I also think now more than ever, part of our challenge is that we are assuming part of the struggle that happens down in the United States. While some of the challenges are identical, I would argue that I don't think it's as bad up here. And I think sometimes we feel that we're as far back as they are in some of our racial relations and some of our struggles. And I think it's important to empathize and be part of that, but not to take ownership for it, because our experience is different and our experience is unique. So I think that's part of the challenge as well, and I think calling myself out about not wanting to be identified as a leader, I think that's one of the challenges we have, because as Alexa pointed out, burnout is a real thing. I went through that I'm now in my mid-30s, I went through that in my 20s, and I was there, and you know, it's week after week, it's month after month, and they're important things, and then when you don't do it, you feel guilty. And then you're always trying to figure out, okay, well, who else is going to step up? And I love the fact that there are more people that are younger than me coming up, doing more than I ever did, because it's great to see, and you don't feel as bad because you feel like you're part of the team. And I think that's one of the challenges that we have, because back in the day when you weren't as visible, there wasn't as much of an expectation for you to be out there. But once you put yourself out there on social media or whatever, there's an expectation, okay, well, 2 months have gone by, why haven't you done something? Or 6 months have gone by, and I haven't seen you, I haven't heard you, I haven't this, and I'm like, well, man, I'm just trying to eat, right? I'm just trying to, like, okay, that's one thing now, right? And it's part of that dynamic that it's very hard to balance. So I think that is something that is new for us as far as the narrative and just the environment changing, whereas my co-panelists have stated that some of those problems are still there, though.
Okay, so the next question has kind of like 2 parts. So the first part is, what can we do to empower young Black leaders? And what challenges do you face? So who wants to start first?
I'll start. I think in terms of empowering young Black leaders, again, it kind of ties into my approach. In speaking with young Black youth that have grown up in Winnipeg, for some, I've recognized that many don't know the struggle that other generations have gone through for them to be here. It feels as if, okay, many parents have, their generations have come up and they have not passed on the story or the lessons that they have learned or shared what they have gone through to get to where they are now, so that the generations now can not only appreciate but understand why things are the way they are, or appreciate how they have gotten to where they are. And as was mentioned before, for many persons, that perception of discrimination, etc., it feels as if it's non-existent until they encounter it, and when they encounter it, they are shocked, because in their mind, it's a thing of the past. So I think one of the main things to do, especially for Black youth, even in Winnipeg, is to really help everyone to get an understanding of of the steps that it's taken for them to get to where they are now. Just likening it to my younger sister when she did history, or Caribbean history, and she was saying, okay, I don't understand why we have to study why Blacks were put on slave ships, etc., and carried across the sea to where we are. I'm just trying to be a doctor, I'm just trying to eat, you know, I'm just trying to move on with my life. But I had to take the time to explain to her that it's not about just rehashing things that have happened before, it's about understanding where you've come from so that you can know where you're going, and you can actually appreciate and take the steps to ensure that other generations will understand and continue that fight to develop the nation. I'm sorry, remind me of the second.
What challenges do you face?
Right now, again, I'm relatively new. I won't say that I face any challenges, because when I speak to persons from various cultures or various demographics, everyone is open to having a discussion. I think sometimes, as was mentioned before, apathy is probably the biggest thing that I face. For some persons, it really gets to the point of, like, what's the sense? What's the point? Or, yeah, it's just another issue. We have so many other things to factor in, or so many other things to focus on that are more important. But it's one of those things that, if left untouched or untackled or unexplained or unapproached, that's just one of the underlying things that can cause a bigger problem later on. So apathy, I think, would be the biggest issue that I believe we face.
Thank you.
I think one of the challenges that we have there to empower young Black leaders is that we need to redefine leadership. I think one of the struggles that I have, and I think some other people have, is, again, like I said before, is identifying yourself as a leader. But I think we have to let other people know that their story and that their experience has value, and that you might not be running a corporation or a business or starting an organization, but your experience is valuable and valid, and many of the things that you experience are common to a lot of other people. And I think sometimes we tend to internalize some of our problems and think that it's just us and we isolate ourselves. And I think it's been interesting because my sister and I have just been going through this discussion because she has a son, so we talk about my nephew quite a bit, and we discuss, I guess, how our parents brought us up with the things that they knew. And a lot of that, I guess, is very common in Black culture, that sometimes you don't always express certain types of emotions and you don't always communicate the way you should. And it wasn't that our parents, did us wrong, but they just didn't know any better. And I think it's important for us to not pass on some of those things and be a lot more open about, feeling sad or hurt or pain, and not always saying, okay, well, I need to be strong and I always have to have my shoulders back and my chin up. That it's okay to say, hey, this happened and it sucked and I'm sad and I'm hurt. And someone will be like, well, so did I. And we can kind of go through that together, because I think until we can kind of acknowledge that some of those things are real, that we're not going to get other people standing up to say, hey, I can take on this burden with you, we can carry this together, as opposed to the few of us wanting to stand up and then burning out and then losing them. Because over the past, let's say, 20 years, I've seen many people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s that went through that as well. And all of a sudden at some point they were like, you know what, I'm tired, I can't do this anymore, it's your turn. But if we're doing this together, then none of us have to get tired, and we can kind of go through that together. And I think that starts with kind of acknowledging how we were raised in a certain sense, and kind of getting past some of those, I guess, stigmas about our emotions and how we deal with some of those things. My challenges are generally time and money, energy, coordination. I think those are common for everybody. I think we want to do as much as we can, but there's only so much you can do, and I think that's one of the challenges that I have.
I would echo a lot of what Maurice said. I think to empower Black youth specifically, we have to ensure that there are available resources and programs that they can express and redefine and explore their identity. We actually sent a letter of intent to the Minister of Education and Training to work on some type of strategic development and implementation of Black Manitobans and Black Canadians in Manitoba's education system, because lately when I've been working with or going to schools and speaking with Black youth, like you said before, they have no point of reference of their history, whether that's on a local or international scale. And it's quite alarming, because that's a toxic academic environment to be in when you have, I went to a predominantly white high school, and there was nothing mentioned about Black history in my education prior to university. And even within my university career, I had to look for that myself, and it was a lot of self-education. So I think to empower Black youth, you have to make sure that, like you said, you're creating spaces where they can go after school programs or community groups that they just feel okay and supported to be themselves and to learn from other leaders. And like you said, we don't have those resources. Part of the reason why we did so much artistic initiatives with Black Spaces, because that's where you can get tangible grants. The government's not going to feel threatened when Black people are being creative. When we're getting together to, strategize to challenge the system, that's where they're going to be like, oh, well, maybe we're not going to give you that $2,000. We need you to be right here. We don't need you to be up here. Because whenever Black people get together, and this is why for a lot of our events with Black Space, we said, sorry, white people, you can't attend, because when they come, the space is compromised, and then folks feel uncomfortable to speak how they really want in front of people that maybe they won't be able to identify with. And we need to be on the same page and actually, rebuild trust in our communities, because there's a lot of division, there's a lot of broken promises, there's a lot of politics that, you know, keep different communities divided, whether that's African versus Caribbean. I've seen that as a big reality growing up in Manitoba. And this isn't just something that's happening in Manitoba, it's across the whole country. And yeah, that's a huge challenge that we're facing, is just being able to be on the same page, and because we're all working on the same thing, really. We're all working on the same thing. It's just that somebody's, you know, writing chapter 1, someone else is writing chapter 7, we don't have our introduction done, you know what I'm saying? We're all writing the same book, but we're not on the same page. And once we get on the same page, that's when outside entities will not be able to mess with us.
I'll just add 2 things to that. Mentor and teach. You know, if you see a young person, a woman, a man, you know, if you see they have such high potential, just mentor them, be there for them. If you see them, they have the same interest as you, you know, and you are in this position where, you know, you can give them the resources and you can give them the places where they can know where to go. Just be there for them. That's what I do. If I see a young person is always asking me, oh, how did you end up doing this and that? Like, it's not just, I didn't just get this job easy. I didn't just study in school easily, you know. I had to go through all these challenges too. So be there for the young person, mentor them, and give them the little steps that you did. So that's all I had to say to that question. 4th question. In Manitoba, are there enough young Black leaders to make a significant impact in society and in government?
First, so I think when I've been asked this question a number of times, and I think part of my challenge with it is that I think it depends on what the goal is. I think sometimes we have this idea of a bunch of milestones we want to get to, but we're not sure what our bigger picture or what our end goal is. And I believe that part of the issue with that is that we don't know what we need to get where we want to go. And I remember that my dad used to tell me the Trinidad and Tobago Society, you know, he's like, well, you should run and take over the organization, this and this and this. And I said to him, well, I'm like, well, what is the Trinidad and Tobago Society doing? Like, what is the goal of that organization, right? Like, I understand that we get together, we do things, we celebrate our culture and all of those things, but I think that organizations like that mean a very different thing to myself that was born here as opposed to my father who came here from Trinidad 40 years ago. Right? So it's hard for me to sit down and be like, okay, well, now, yes, I want to take over this organization or another one and do that, and then now I have to convince other people to come with me, but I don't know what we're doing. Right? So that's one of the things about identifying where we're trying to actually go, and I think when we do that, it'll be easier to get enough Black leaders, but I think it's hard to say whether we have enough or not when we haven't really defined what that is. On the government side, I'm someone who's been in government for 11 years, I would say no. I think one of the challenges that I face in government is being one of the only Black people in government. One of my other challenges is that there are very few Black people in government that were born here in Canada or here in Manitoba. And not that there's anything wrong with having not, but I think that that is also a reflection on us and things that we need to do a better job of bringing people through the educational institutions and what they need to do to get into government, to be able to qualify for some of those jobs. Because I look back now and I think about the long litany of things that they ask you just to identify in your cover letter to be able to apply for the job, never mind to actually get the job. And it's overwhelming, because I remember I was showing it to my students, I was like, oh, apply for the job, and their eyes were glazing over, like, what the hell is all of this, right? And those were students that were actually in the classroom. Right? Never mind the ones that aren't in the classroom that are looking and saying, okay, well, how do I begin? How do I get started? How do I do those things? And for myself in government, it's always one of those things where I do have to be very careful about the way I say things or the way I do things, because I don't know how things are being taken, and I don't want to be able to say, well, okay, well, I basically stifled my own career because I was too Black in a room, or I was too this in a room, or I was too that in a room. Right? And I don't know where that line is, so I just stay 50 feet away from it, right? And then sometimes I feel like I'm doing a disservice to the people that are saying, okay, well, you being inside the system, you should be saying and doing things. But again, because there are no quote-unquote leaders, Black leaders in government ahead of me, there's nobody I can ask, right? There's nobody to be like, hey, how did you deal with this 20 years ago in the system? There is nobody, right? So even the ones that are older than me, they're not from here. They're from other parts of the world, and they've come in and they're working, which is great. But I think that's one of the challenges again with leadership. And then I sit down and say to myself, okay, but what am I trying to get out of this? Right? I go to work, they pay me, it's great. So is there something else I'm trying to do? Am I actually trying to change the system? Am I trying to reframe it? Or am I just trying to be another person who goes to work every day and gets paid? Right? So I think when we're starting to kind of define and look at some of these things, that's where we kind of have to identify, okay, well, what are we trying to get out of this? And what steps we need to take to actually get there.
Yeah, I would say leadership is difficult. I mean, I have been challenged incredibly by the community, Black space, because I think people see numbers online and think we hold some type of stake in this community. And in some ways, yes, but in a lot of ways, I don't have any influential power over the government of Manitoba. And I approach things through grassroots approach, right? And grassroots is amazing and it's necessary, but long term it's not sustainable. We need power, we need political influence, we need money behind our movements. And also too, like, I am so for representation and the importance of representation. I think Obama's coming here in March, like, that's great, people are gonna go see him. But I think, and I hope folks are on the same page, it's safe to say, even when you have Black folks in positions of power in the system does not change. It does not certainly change for us. And they are just there as a beacon of hope and here, we gave you your leader, you can't say we're racist anymore. And I would not discredit folks who want to run, who want to get involved. It's important, but at the end of the day, you're one Black person out of 100 white people, and you're trying to push things for your community, and you're dealing with folks who maybe aren't ready to, move that needle forward. And Black folks in politics is very complicated for me, because even when we came from that summit, there were a lot of Black radical advocates and activists around the country who are already doing amazing work outside of the system that's putting pressure onto the system, because the system and the government only changes when they get pressure from the people. That's the only way they'll take accountability and actually change something. So leadership, like you said, people have called me a leader. It's a very intimidating and incredible title to have, but there is work that comes with it, and I don't think that there are enough of us to make that systemic change that we need, and that's only going to come through any type of revolutionary act, to be honest. So that's what
My short answer is no. The longer answer echoes some of the sentiments that have been shared before. I think you have enough individuals per se to make that change, but I don't think you have the commonality. Many of the themes that have been echoed before, you find in many cases Black leaders feeling like they are the only one in their sphere, like even in academia, or a recent personal examination of sports psychology or psychology as a field that I want to focus on. Like, you don't have enough. It's just a simple thing. But then going back to a point echoed from the previous question, it's a case where you have so many different individuals or so many different entities, but we're not working together. So if we're not working together to achieve a common goal, the question that follows from that is, why would anyone else want to look, or where would someone find inspiration or see that example of wanting to be a leader, of wanting to be a young Black leader making a difference in their country or in their city, in their sphere, if we're not working together to do that? So short answer, no. Longer answer, the potential is there, but it will only remain potential until we work together as a community to achieve those goals.
Thank you. Next question. Do you coordinate or partner with other racialized groups to put forward systemic changes that will improve life for all Manitobans, regardless of identity? Whoever wants to start first.
Okay, I'll go first. That's a really good question. I think I've worked with other community groups in the past to talk about, systemic oppression, challenging white supremacy. I did some work with the Critical Race Network at the University of Winnipeg. Throughout my academic career, I did a lot of activism on campus. And I think the best way I can sum up this question, at the first Black Lives Matter rally that we did, there was a family who came and brought a sign that said Black Lives Matter on Indigenous land. And that just reminded me of the collective struggle that BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color, POC communities have in Winnipeg, and how we need to express solidarity with each other. I would hope that the work I've done has made waves and connections in other communities, but I would say that it's important to connect with other communities to make those strong alliances, because we need people on our side when we're challenging systemic oppression. And even though there's different avenues of racism, whether that be anti-Indigenous, anti-Black, Islamophobia, and communities of color really need to band together and be there for one another, because at the end of the day, I think we're all facing the same oppression. We're just experiencing it in a different way. And yeah, I think that there needs to be more models of bridging communities and partnership and alliances, because yeah, we need the numbers on our side.
For me, I think the first thing that I've been doing is just relate some of the research that I'm conducting, even though it encapsulates just the experiences of newcomers in general. It's interesting to speak with some of the newcomer athletes or immigrant athletes, and you find that their experiences are similar to Indigenous athletes, and just many of the things that they've been going through, as we've been saying, things that we believe don't exist or don't happen in Winnipeg, and to really sit with someone in this day and age, 2019, and hear their experiences of things that we think are non-existent. I think that's the first step that I've taken. Working with the wonderful committee also that's put on this panel discussion, I've been able to just learn so much about what's happening in the Black community. And I think just with the short time that I've been here in Canada, I think the long-term goal is looking to see what role I can play in creating more unity within the different groups, and seeing what role I can play in having everyone work together to achieve that common goal.
I think I guess use one example, one of the older experiences I had when I was younger, I used to help my father with an organization called the Workers of Color Support Network. It's now defunct, it doesn't exist anymore, but at the time what the organization did is it supported primarily women and people of color who were facing discrimination in the workforce and helping them navigate the system. So it was very interesting because there was my father and a number of people who didn't have, my job was basically to take all the information they had and make it readable for other people. And I think it was a very important time because at the time I was very young and I didn't understand that there were women that were just being discriminated against because they had a baby and then they came back and their job was gone. Or there were people of color that were just being discriminated against and couldn't get jobs. And all the things that we know to be common now, they were very new to me at the time. And I remember the organization, and I remember that was one of the big things that got built into the employment equity policy that we have now in government, and a lot of the other policies. That organization was, I think, one of the successes because it didn't need to exist after a certain point, because eventually the government built a framework around it and said, okay, well, you can't do this to people when this happens, or you can't do this when that happens. So there was no need to take and help walk people through the legal and government jargon in order for them to just have access to basic rights in the workplace, because we'd done that already. So it was one of my, I guess, more fond memories of something that I can see an endpoint. Because I was talking about not having an endpoint sometimes, it was very clear that that was something they were working towards, and I was happy that that got achieved. And it wasn't just for black people, it was for people of all colors and a lot of women as well.
Thank you. What have your experiences been like as it relates to racism in Winnipeg?
Oh, well, in the short time that I've been here, I think only two experiences stand out. Coming to Canada, I knew it wasn't the States, so I was happy. But at the same time, I wasn't naive. I knew that there were issues of discrimination, especially as it relates to the Indigenous population. The two instances that I can think of, one not so bad is just being a 5'11" and 3/4, yes, the doctor locked me up a quarter. Young man stepping into a bus with a balaclava, fully wrapped up and standing up. There was this old white lady who was sitting in one of the seats, and as soon as she saw me come in, she did the shuffle with her bag, and then I looked at her and she just kept staring at me and kept shifting with her bag, and I'm saying to myself, am I the one that's making you feel uncomfortable? But again, I really just put it aside as one of those instances. I don't know what's going through her mind. So I won't say that she was being discriminatory in any way, shape, or form. She may just have felt threatened because of my size and because my face was covered. So I don't know. But the one that really sticks out to me is being followed in a store. My wife and I were being followed by a security guard. The irony of the situation is that you had somebody of a different complexion right behind the security guard shoplifting while the guard was following us around. And my wife and I, we just looked and we said, interesting. It wouldn't help for us to say, oh, well, look, that person is who you need to follow. But that experience actually just resonates with us, that the security guard followed us from we entered to, and we were legitimate shoppers. You know, we were using our hard-earned money to purchase goods, but the person that was being ignored was somebody who was thought to be more legitimate than we were.
I would say I have, I could probably write a dissertation on racism in Winnipeg, who knows? And I would like also, that whole argument that, you know, Canada's better than the States is not true.
That's right.
Because white supremacy knows no border or boundaries, and it exists every single where you go across the country and around the world. So it's just the way you interact with it, right? And that's what I try to educate people on. You know, white fragility is a real thing, and every time I speak in public, it's not to make anybody feel uncomfortable. If you are, unfortunately that's not, I can't do anything about that. That's something what that person is going through. And like with racism in Winnipeg, growing up, I experienced it more when I was like, obviously the only noticeable non-white person in my class. But colorism and shadeism and light skin privilege is a real thing, because even though I've been through a lot of trauma when it comes to anti-Black racism, my experience is not the same as my mom's. My mom grew up in St. James, a predominantly white community. There's 7 of them in the family. She went to an all-white high school. She got bullied by her peers, her teachers, anyone in the community. And you know, just sitting with her for an hour and speaking with her on her past, there's some horror stories in there. And you know, she was born in the 60s. She's in her 50s now. Not much has changed since then. And I think I'd like to see Winnipeg get to a point where we're comfortable to acknowledge the injustice that happens to people of color in this province, because the longer we think that we're superior and this northern superiority that Canada always has over the States, the more detrimental it is to people of color, and the more you convince yourself, like, no, that person didn't really mean it, or maybe they're just miseducated, that's damage to your psyche and your well-being. When you try to convince yourself, like, oh, this person didn't really mean it, even if they didn't mean it, it's a negative impact on you as a person, as a Black person in Winnipeg. And it's okay to say what you're feeling and what you're going through, and to have those emotions and that anger and that passion, because what you're going through, and systemically what we're all going through, is unjust. It's not right, and it's okay to stand up and say, yeah, you know what, this person was racist, and we're going to challenge that, and we're going to move forward as a community, and just to not always protect or feel like you have to adjust your rhetoric to make other people feel comfortable. That's not going to get you very far. And the more radical and true you are in the way you're feeling, the longer and the more powerful we're going to be, I think, as a community.
I think my experience with racism has kind of been a bit, it's transitioned a bit. When I was younger, I played sports and things like that, so I think the racism I felt was, I guess, anything that I did that was not athletic that was good was deemed to be white, right? Because of the way I spoke, or the way I dressed, or the way I did all of these things, right? Any of those quote-unquote good qualities were white, or I was less than Black, or I was this in those instances. But when I'm playing soccer or dunking a basketball, which I can't do anymore, but you know, that's the Black part of me, right? But the smart part of me, that's the white part. And as you get older and, you know, running for office and, you know, being in some of those political circles, it came out the same way, but it would change differently. It'd be like, oh, you speak very well, right? Because that's the way they phrase it, right? So like, oh, or, you know, where did you come from, or, you know, what do your parents do, right? You know, and it was all of those things. And then again, how do you navigate that, right? Because it's very easy to sit down and say, okay, well, you know, we have to call people out and this and that or whatever. But particularly when you're running in politics, you want people to vote for you. Right? You want people to like you. You want people to support you, right? I can't be like, hey, I don't like this passive racism, but take my card and vote for me. Like, it doesn't work that way, right? And it doesn't work inside the government either, right? When you're the one Black person and people are talking about disadvantaged communities, or talking about Indigenous communities, and there's all of this passively racist rhetoric going around, I can't stand up and be like, yo, I don't like the way this is going down, let's change the tone, right? It's just not, it's not practical. Right? Because there's some time for that, and there's other times where it's not. And if we want to talk, to use Alexa's words, white fragility in some of those things, whether it's real or not, we can't always push that, right? There's just no space, because you're saying to what end, right? I stand up and then I'm homeless and have no job anymore, right? There's also the reality of the society that we live in, and I think that's one of the struggles that I go through, because I don't have, like I said, there aren't a lot of people ahead of me that have charted that same path that I can go to and say, hey, how did you manage this? How did you do this? And I think that's one of the challenges that we have, because yes, I do believe that there are tons of things, and tons of times I should have said something or wanted to say something and didn't, but I don't know where it would have gotten me. Like, I don't know how much further along I would be, and I think that I have gotten to where I am, which isn't as far as I'd like, but I think I've gotten to this point by being careful. And it sucks sometimes, right? It does, I'm not gonna lie. And you know, I sit down and I do that introspection, and I sit down and say, okay, well, was that the right thing to do? Or I think about how my dad would have handled it. But my dad, like I said, the narrative has changed. My dad grew up in a different world, right? He didn't have access to the things that I have access to, so he wasn't risking the things that I'm risking, right? And we have to recognize that for the people that are coming after us, that there are actually things at stake now, because that's what progress does. When progress comes in, we actually get things. And once you have things, then you are worried about losing them, right? So that's the whole thing that we have to recognize when these things are changing and how this narrative is changing. That yes, we want to stand up, but we have to be careful about how we do that. Because yes, some people aren't ready for some things. And some of those people are still in positions of power, and they're still paying me when I go to work 2 weeks, right? So that's my, I guess, balance with the racism.
I just have wonderful answers, by the way, all of you. Just have 2 things to add to that. So I speak 5 languages, and 2 of those languages you will not expect me to speak because I don't look like I'm from those countries. So there's been, to make the story short, there's been an incident where I'm on the bus and I overhear 2 individuals speaking in one of those 2 languages that I speak, and they're saying, oh, there are so many black people here, like refugees and immigrants, and like I'm just awkwardly like sitting kind of in front of them, and then they're like, yeah, there's just one sitting in front of us, but she has nice hair, you know? A nice compliment, and then as soon as I was gonna get off the bus, I turned around and I said, okay, I hope you guys have a nice day, in the language that they were speaking. So, you know, like, I did get a compliment, but at the same time, you know, the way that they were saying it, it wasn't very nice. So it felt a little bit offensive. So by me turning around and be like, oh my goodness, this black woman speaks our language, you know, they were like a little bit shocked. So this has happened a lot with me and my family. Like my mom is here, of course, taking pictures of me.
That's why.
This has happened a lot to us because we speak 5 languages. We lived in many different countries. A lot of immigrants here speak more than 1 language that you won't expect because either they were working as diplomats or they moved to different places. And you know, like Canada is very diverse, so we need to accept that, and we need to be careful with that, and also we need to stop, you know, discriminating. So this is just for everybody. I'm speaking for everyone, and just something to look out for. I have one more thing to say to that. The example that you gave, that like people ask you where you're from or stuff like that. Like I get that question too. I don't mind explaining my story. It's long, but you know, there's different ways of asking that. Where are you from? You know, you can say like, yeah, I'm Canadian. We're all, well, most of us, I think most of us here are Canadian, but you can say, yeah, I'm Canadian, or African Canadian, or Asian Canadian, or you know, but like that question, just, I don't get too bugged by it, but I know people who kind of get annoyed when you ask them like, where are you from? You know, you can ask, but there's nicer way for you to ask those questions. Like you can say, where are your family? Where's your family from? You don't have to ask the person that question. So that's all I wanted to add to that. Now the last question, the debate, the intense debate question. Okay. Now, should we address racism directly, or should we believe we can influence by demonstrating inclusive leadership? Who wants to start?
I can start.
Okay.
I think for me, it may be a blend of both. I think in my bio, you heard the quote, I believe it was Mahatma Gandhi, that encouraged us to be the change that we need to see in the world. So I think for me, kind of modeling it, mentoring others, and being open to, not just being open to, but trying to foster further discussion and discourse. I think that would be helpful in terms of addressing racism or discrimination in any way, shape, or form. As I mentioned, having spoken to so many persons, I do recognize where, again, for some persons, whether it be white fragility or even white privilege, there are many things that persons are just not aware of. And in just sitting and having a discussion, it actually helps everyone to, you know, take that step closer to a middle point or some sort of middle ground. And as Alexa mentioned before, there may be some instances where you need to just address certain things directly, because if you don't address it directly, in some cases it just won't change. But I do firmly believe in both And my wife will probably tell you that's because I'm more of a facilitator in a way. I naturally do that. I naturally foster discussion. I naturally sit down in large rooms of a wide variety of persons, of demographics and backgrounds, and I just want to hear. I just want to help others connect. If there's one group here and another group here, I'll try to find a way to let those groups come to the center of the room and try to have a discussion regardless of what the topic is. So I think there's a combination of both approaches will be beneficial going forward, and that's just my initial take.
Just repeat the question again. It's direct.
Should we address racism directly, or should we believe we can influence by demonstrating inclusive leadership?
Yeah, I would say the more you directly challenge it, if you're alone doing that work, the more alone and isolated and burnt out that you will get. And as far as inclusive leadership, I'm not too sure. Okay, so when I don't know, I'm sure many people have had this experience in the room, and if you don't, just hear me out. I grew up in West Kildonan, which is like North Main, and throughout most of my younger years, I was in a lot of situations, and I graduated high school in 2011, so I'm 25 now. It hasn't been that long, but I'm in a lot of situations where, or I used to be, where, you know, the elephant was in the room, someone says something racist, everybody looks at you, someone says the N-word, everybody looks at you. Oh, can I say this? It's in a rap song, it's okay, right? No, it's not okay, don't ever say that word. And I've had this experience, and I used to just sit there and not say anything because you know no one's gonna have your back, and you're gonna be presented, you know, as an aggressive black person in the room. So you're like, okay, I won't say anything, just shut up, just sit here. It's not gonna affect me. But you know what? It does affect you. It's called a microaggression. And then you go home and then you think about it and you're like, shit, I should have said something. Why didn't I say anything? That wasn't right. They shouldn't have said that. And that's when I would say directly challenge it. Because now I've gotten to a place where I hear something, someone say something discriminating towards anybody, you just stop it in its tracks, right? And when you get comfortable with that pattern, like, no, actually that's racist, and you feel comfortable challenging that, then that's when, yes, I would absolutely say directly challenge it. You have to. Inclusive, I have been in a lot of spaces where I am educating other people who do not come from the black community, who identify as white or who identify as whatever, and sometimes it leads to a lot of misunderstanding, miseducation, hours of trying to explain your experience and how you feel, for at the end of the day for them to still not get it. I'll give you an example. When I was presenting at the Mood Disorders Association of Manitoba, I think that's the right name. I was telling them my experience with activism and self-care, and it was me and 25 white women. And they were like, yeah, you know, I understand what you're saying, but there's always a but. If you understand what I'm saying, there wouldn't be a but. So I understand what you're saying, but I feel like, this is what one woman said, I feel like we shouldn't always be focusing on race. We should be focusing on poverty, because that's the real issue here. And I said, do you know how intersectionality works? And she's like, no. I said, okay, well, intersectionality is the core, and then poverty comes after. And if you ever looked at the wheel, the isms are keeping classism, racism, sexism. And she's like, yeah, but we shouldn't focus on race all the time. Why do I have to focus on race? And she didn't want to focus on race because it made her uncomfortable. Thank you. So this is why I'm so passionate about we're all adults here, are we not? We're all adults. We all have experienced trauma and hardship in our life. We know that trauma does not, it doesn't discriminate. We've all experienced it. But systemically, black people face trauma from the system, and always will and always have. And if we don't get to a place where we're comfortable talking about the realities that we're all going through and not denying it in our own communities and saying that, oh, this person didn't really mean it like this. Yes, they did. That's when we're going to move forward as a community. I believe that from the bottom of my heart, and especially with the work we're doing with Project Heal, the Black people who came in that program and were willing to be vulnerable with each other and talked about Black healing. We need to focus on that. We have too much trauma and so many years of discrimination and oppression that we have not addressed. I've seen it in my grandparents' generation and my mom's generation and my generation. Like, we just keep sweeping things under the rug, and that's not how we're going to solve issues, especially when we're in an era of, you know, mental health is a trending topic. That's what we need to focus on. And when you accept the realities that are presented, then we can just move forward as a community, and we don't need to use these buzzwords anymore. So I would say direct it all the time, but make sure that you're supported when you direct it and you're grounded in yourself. And it's very intimidating to say something in a room where you're the only person advocating for that. So make sure you have that support.
I'm going to take the counterpoint to this. Although I agree with everything you guys said, I wouldn't suggest that you guys are wrong. I think one of the problems with direct confrontation, in my experience, is that, well, I guess I'll back this up, is that sometimes we forget as Black people is that sometimes we're the only Black person other people know, right? Like, and if you are the only Black person that they know and they speak to on a day-to-day basis and aren't just some random person they say hi, or your, you know, cousin's friend's boyfriend or wife or whatever, right? So one of the things that we sometimes have to do is recognize that, and maybe this isn't fair, that we take ownership for our community when we are out, right? A lot of people, like you said, if you see a Black person on the street doing something ridiculous, or they're drunk or falling over the place, everybody looks at you, right? Because you're somehow taking ownership for whatever's happening, even though you don't know that person. So that's one of the challenges that we have when we deal with some of these things. But I do believe that we need to be a little bit more inclusive, and I think I go back to Dave Chappelle's a comedian. I find him very hilarious. But one of the things he was talking about when he was talking about the Me Too movement is that he said, in order for this movement to be successful, you're going to have some men on your side, and I'm telling you that you're going to have some imperfect allies. And I think that's something that we don't think about as well when we're in our community, that there might be people that are of a different race or have said or done or thought bad things, but that doesn't mean that they're bad people and that they can't be part of our journey and they can't be part of our road to success and getting where we need to go. Right? And I think that's where we need to kind of understand that if we're only looking for the purest of the pure, we're going back to those times when, you know, some of us who grew up in the church, right? And, you know, I don't drink, I don't this, I don't that. Only the best of the best could be the head of the church, and the rest of you were just sinners that needed to sit in the congregation. And I don't think that narrative works. I don't think that type of framework works. And from what I've seen, going into political circles, going into government circles, going into business circles where these decisions are made, what happens if you're too loud? You get kicked out of the room. Right? You get uninvited from the email list. Oh, we're sorry, we didn't know this, we didn't know that, we didn't know whatever, right? So at what point do we stop banging on the door and making a bunch of noise and just saying, hey, we have to start being a little bit more inclusive here. We have to understand that people are not perfect. They're going to make mistakes, they have made mistakes, and part of it is just how they were raised. Right? I can sit down and say, oh, I have X and Y and Z challenges because of the way I was raised, and these are all of these things, but all of a sudden, when I have to deal with somebody else's problems, like, no, you need to fix that right now, right? You can't have that problem that was institutionalized in your life from when you were a child, as far as race relations are concerned, but I can have all of these problems. We have to recognize that this isn't everybody's fault. Yes, there are bad people out there who do things, do them consciously and understand that, but we also have to recognize that we're people, and we're human. And we have to understand that if we're going to move to that point, there has to be some give on our side and on their side.
I know Alexa
Yeah.
is trying to not jump off her chair.
Do you want to go?
No, you.
Yes. First of all, we're allowed to disagree with each other respectfully, and I still love everybody, okay? What I would say, no, because we have to, because you know, Black people, we don't always agree with each other, but we have to love each other at the end of the day. I know, eh? I know, never. I would say out of the equation. Take the white people. I'm not talking about white people. I'm talking about the system that they benefit from. And if white people really wanted to change, their lives would be significantly impacted where they wouldn't have that systemic privilege anymore, right? So yeah, it might not be them individually, and there's good and bad in all of us, I know that, but it's the systemic oppression and discrimination that I'm talking about. Even when we're focusing on inclusivity, like collectively, I said this, I did a podcast with this amazing group in Toronto, and I said, collectively, I don't have hope in politicians or the system or white people. I don't. Because for centuries, they've showed us who they are collectively. For centuries, okay? Centuries, that's documented, it's facts, okay? Individually, there is hope. I will say that. I've seen people change over years, and I've seen people dedicated to education. I've tried to do that. That's the Lord's work. I've tried to do that and educate other people on how racist they are. It's exhausting and you can't do it. You just can't do it. You can't do it because you'll be in a room with 25 different white women and you're just sitting there like, what am I doing with my life? And it's very complicated because at the end of the day, they don't have a point of reference because they're coming from a completely different experience. And that's okay. I've accepted them for who they are. When Black people just accept things, not accept the behavior, but accept them for who they are, then we can move forward as a community and stop asking for things and start making things and taking things. Because you can't keep asking for something that you've asked for generations that you're not getting. You have to make it and take it, quite frankly. And that's what I've seen folks do in Toronto, what they've been doing in Nova Scotia, and other parts of the country. They're not asking, they're taking, they're making. And it's no disrespect to whatever is happening politically, but collectively, yeah, they've got a lot of work to do. We have a lot of work to do too, but that's where we have to focus our attention on us. And individually, I will say there's hope. Collectively, they've shown us their true colors many times.
I guess, and I really hope it doesn't come across as if we're contradicting each other or going on each other. Because, again, I think it's a bigger picture. It's a bit of how much of the pie is going to consist of what. Because there's a place for both approaches in my mind. Okay. And again, my wife will also tell you, I tend to be like, let's look at things generally. And she's just like, where do we need to eat dinner? But it depends on the day and the I definitely think, you know, when looking at it, I'm looking at Colin Kaepernick recently. He sacrificed and given so much. Yeah. And they had the settlement last week, if I'm not mistaken. But the NFL isn't going to change. The NFL will remain the same. So what did he accomplish? He proved that there was collusion in the NFL, among NFL owners. What was proven? I think that's why I like, and maybe because people do say I have the patience of Job, so maybe that's why I will sit with discussion, just listen and nod, say, yeah, I get you, but, and get great here doing it. But I guess maybe one way we could start is start with the youth. When I say youth, I mean for children. Help them to understand not just where they're coming from and not just the systemic barriers that are in place, but what they can do to make that change. Because I think the change that we're hoping to see, if it hasn't happened in 40 years or 50 years, it's not going to happen by 2020. So maybe we can start with our younger ones, model it ourselves, and be active change agents, but at the same time, facilitate discourse and education so that they can know and help to be a part of change long term. Similar to what Maurice said quite a few points ago, and it's something that when we had discussions about politics, because yes, I wanted to go into law and go into politics at one point in time, that changed. what I recognized back home is that there's so many persons who were driven to make a change, were inspired, but once they got into the system, they just got tired. And it's facts. You have to feed your family. You have to live somewhere. So they end up looking like the system after a few years. I think the challenge for us going forward is a combination of addressing it directly, education, being a part of the change, but also not being burnt out, which is harder, easier said than done, but not being burnt out and becoming a part of the system where we've given up and we continue the cycle over and over again. And we might be 20 or 30 years older and we're in another panel discussion a few years later down the line and the same issues remain.
I always struggle with the concept of privilege, and I think because the U of M asked me to write something related to this in the alumni magazine, and I think I was struggling with how to address the whole topic of privilege, because I understand that there are racialized components to it, but in one of my classrooms when I talk about poverty, and we look at there's been surveys where they say, okay, well, how do you think the income distribution is in society? And they'll tell you. They'll be like, well, what do you think the ideal is? And they'll tell you. And then we show them what the reality is and how far it is from our ideal or what we thought it was. It's jarring. But I think part of the problem is that people aren't prepared to give up the things that are necessary in order to achieve the life that they call ideal. And I think that's part of the problem, whether it's poverty, whether it's racism, it's whether there needs to be something that needs to be given up. And we always talk about privilege and we say, okay, when you're used to privilege, equality feels like oppression, right? Because it does, right? Like when you're at that point when you're just like, hey, well, I've had all these things and now you want us to have the same amount, right? Like it's a very hard narrative to go through. And whether we're talking about poverty, we're talking about privilege, we're talking about equality, this is why that I always gravitate towards incrementalism, because it is too jarring. It is too jarring. Like I love fruit juice, and you know when the food guide came out and said, you know, fruit juice isn't on the list or whatever, it was a shock to my system. I was like, what? Right? But it's a very simple thing, but you're sitting there saying, okay, well, this is something that I've always believed has been good for me and has been the way things are, and I've been told my entire life through education, through life, that this is good. And then now you're saying, no, it is not. And you want me to sit down and be like, you know, and that's how it is with so many things. And that's why it needs to be incremental. That's why it needs to be inclusive. That's why it has to be a slower process. Because if we try and jar people, or we try and shake their foundation or their system, it doesn't get us anywhere. Because that's what people do. It's that fight or flight, right? You see something and it's too much for you, you'll just back away. You'll be like, no. That person talking about racism, they're just a crazy person, right? Me and all of my friends and family, we know how things are because they all agree with me and I agree with them, right? And if we continue to push back at them and push back at them, it's not going to do anything, right? And I think sometimes we exist in this dual false dichotomy where we say, oh, well, we've made all this progress. No, it's still like the 40s. No, things are okay here, but no, we're just as bad as the United States. I'll disagree, we aren't, right? You look at the statistics, you look at the incarceration rates, you look at the gun crime, you look at all of the drug problems, we are not the same. Some of the problems are the same, but the rate at which it is happening is not. Right? Those are facts. We've gone over them. Their system is different than ours. The United States is different than ours. This is why you can travel 17 hours east or west, and a Canadian is a Canadian, but you go 2 hours south, and all of a sudden you know you're in North Dakota. Right? You know immediately. Because things are different. Right? The border is real. Right? And I think sometimes we exist in this world where things are bad when it's convenient for us and things are good when it's convenient for us. And I think we have to kind of get out of that and actually be honest with ourselves as Black people about where we are. My life is not my father's. Hopefully my children's life will not be mine. Right? I don't know if that gets us to that end point or wherever we need to be, but we have to acknowledge there is some progress, because what we do is when we talk about healing and we talk about hurt and all of these things, we can't heal if we continue to bring up our hurt. If I continue to live my father's pain or my pain, it doesn't help me heal. It doesn't help me move forward. It just makes me angry and it just makes me frustrated. And I spent admittedly, I spent a lot of my life like that. Angry and resentful and all of those things. And it wasn't until I began to deshackle myself from some of that pain and some of that institutional, baggage, that I started to feel like, hey, I feel good now, right? I can talk about these things, I can do what I need to do as much as I can without feeling that burden or carrying that burden. And if we get there in 20 years, we get there. If we don't, I know that I've done my part and I've pushed as much as I can push. I've pushed the rock as far as I can. And I have to be okay with that, as opposed to sitting there saying, no, we need to smash the rock and smash the hill, and then everyone will understand. It doesn't work. But that's my perspective.
Well, thank you so much. This was very powerful. I don't have much to add. I believe now we have a break.
Yeah.
For 10 minutes? 15 minutes?
15 minutes. Yeah.
Okay, so enjoy your break.
We're going to come back and do question and answer period and give the panelists